you want to bring it back to our topic of performance improvement plans that we wanted
Yeah,
to talk about
so here's what
initially?
we want to talk about today. So myself and Leslie were talking another day about performance improvement plans, and we were just like talking about all the different ways that they can be utilized, but how primarily they're utilized to basically start walking somebody out the door. And it
Hmm.
came up in that conversation that there is an element, and we can only really speak for Canada specifically in this case, because the US as it relates to has a different thing and a lot less protection for employees, so it's kind of irrelevant. But in Canada specifically, you normally let somebody go with cause or without cause.
Hmm.
Without cause normally means that your role is no longer needed, and technically you shouldn't be rehiring for the same position because it's about the job not being needed. It's not about the person. So you theoretically could be sued if you just rehired someone for the exact same position that you just let somebody go without cause for. The
Hmm.
second way is with cause, and that's about the person and not the position. And if someone was to challenge with cause in court, you have to have that cause well documented in order to do it. So we theorized, educationally theorized, that this kind of reliance on pips as being a mechanism for firing someone with cause was
Hmm.
largely driven not by necessarily bad intentions on managers, etc., but largely driven by the legal system that's in place in Canada. And so my question to you, a very long question, is one, what have you seen there, and like whether or not we're just locked into that, or whether you think there's like different ways that we could deal with it, outside of just trying to utilize a pip to do it.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like a pip is may be the wrong way, but like is the easy way to do it is the easy way to document cause, because then you have like all the performance issues, and usually like the expectations are set so that the employee's not going to meet them, and then you have this proof that you could fire them with cause. And even still, like it's harder to really prove it's harder to prove cause like concretely, especially if you're doing like cause without any type of severance attached to it. It makes it a lot harder to prove. So pips are like the one way that it's like, we did this, we had this timeline, we measured it, and you know they didn't hit it, so this is our proof. And a lot of times it's accepted, especially if the employee is like, they're not fully aware of kind of what their rights are and what the obligations on the employer to prove are. So they kind of take that and be like, well, I didn't make my PIP, and this was threatened, and I didn't make it, and they don't have any documentation on their own kind of with supporting their own cause, so they don't really feel like they have a leg to stand on. But there definitely is better ways that you can go about it, and you can still terminate somebody with cause. But again, this will, like I said before, you got to go back to the beginning. Got to go back to the beginning. Because the biggest gap I see, which is why PIPs kind of come into place, is that in the beginning, when an employee starts, there isn't a clear expectation for what is expected of them in their role. There's not like a clear job description. Their onboarding doesn't have like clear training outlined of like, this is what's expected of you, and this is what we'll be training you on, and like so that you're meeting these objectives. So that when a PIP comes along, it's normally like, well, they're not doing what we want them to do, so let's put them on a PIP and then kind of explain, but it's usually only pointing out what their weaknesses are, not what the overall expectations are for the role. But if you kind of go back to the beginning, you have those expectations and they're not performing to that. You have the documentation of like, hey, when this person was hired, we have what is expected of them in this role clearly laid out, and it was clear, and there was a clear training plan to get them to this point. And then they're not making it to this point, so that's when a performance improvement plan could come into play and say, out of these expectations, here's where they're not meeting them, so this is the performance improvement plan that we put them on to get them there. And then if they don't make that, then you have the cause. So that's kind of like the best way to kind of go about it, is to kind of have from beginning to end. But there's ways you can do it without calling it a performance improvement plan. Like realistically, when you have a new employee for the first year, there should be regular check-ins and regular callbacks to the onboarding process.
Hmm.
Like you should be calling back to what those expectations are, whether it be through, performance management, like a review type thing. Some companies do it on a semi-annual basis, some do it on a quarterly basis, but whatever your organization's kind of check-ins are, really should be for the first year of that employee's life. I mean, 6 months to a year, you should be calling back to that to make sure that they are on track. Because for a lot
Hmm.
of roles, it takes at least like 3, 6, 9 months to get fully ramped up into a role where you're fully productive in that role.
Hmm.
So if you're once you're kind of going through your one-on-ones, you should be calling back to that so that you can capture these performance issues in advance. And that way, when you're capturing them in advance, you can address them without having to go on a PIP. But and also if you're addressing them in advance, you would find out a lot earlier that somebody isn't performing to the level that you need them to for this role, and you can make those decisions a lot earlier, sometimes within that 3-month probationary period in Canada, where you can terminate anybody for any reason and you don't
Hmm.
have to worry about going down the process of like a PIP and all this extra work. But a
Hmm.
lot of the times you go through the onboarding process, and then there's like this middle ground where you're kind of left in the ether of doing your role, and your manager may or may not be good at doing those check-ins, and then it only really comes up again when there's this big gap because somebody's not performing, and then you're like, now we have to address it, where if you've been addressing it the whole time, A, you would have caught it earlier, B, you could have acted on it earlier and saved yourself time, money, etc.
And I think like that makes so much sense when you think about it. And then a lot of the managers who put people on PIPs, they're probably never going to say, "Oh, I didn't train somebody properly" or anything like that, right? They're not going to go into that. So they're putting the person on the PIP because in my experience, it's because they didn't like the person or they didn't want them to stay, so they put them on the PIP. And as you mentioned, most people don't know they can challenge the PIP or they can negotiate it. And Jenny pointed this out before. I didn't know you could do that. Because a lot of the goals are vague. There's not really anything you can measure it at. So, have you ever seen somebody with a genuine kind of reason for putting somebody on a PIP? And on the other side, have you seen people who wanted to put people on a PIP that they just didn't like them? And yeah.
I've seen both for sure. More on the side of like, I don't like this person, I want them to leave. And that's like, that's common, easiest way to do it. But I have seen them where they work, and they will work. The only way they will work is if there is equal amount of energy and effort put in by the manager and the employee. If the manager's not willing to invest their time to develop this employee to get them to the, the level that they need them to be at, it'll never work. It'll never work. And most managers, it's like the first question I ask managers when they come to me saying, "Hey, I have this employee, they're not performing well, I want to put them on a PIP." And I'm like, "Great, cool, love that for you. How much time do you have to dedicate to this?" And they're like, "What do you mean?" I'm like, you need to have action items for yourself as well as the employee, because it is your responsibility as their manager to train and develop them to get them to the level you need them at. Because when you're putting somebody on a PIP, it must be for lack of skill, not lack of will. Like if somebody doesn't want to do their job, a PIP's not going to make them want to do their job more. And no amount of effort from anybody in the company is going to make somebody do something they legitimately don't want to do. And then you got to look at the other options. But if it's purely a lack of skill, then like I said, there's a lot of obligations and expectations from a manager. Your job is, as being the head of your team, to develop that person and help them get their skills up to the level that they need to be at. And that requires a lot of time investment. So like I said, there needs to be clear action items like, as your manager, I'm going to help you get to this level by doing X, whether that's we're going to, have more weekly one-on-ones or have more one-on-ones throughout the week. We're going to set aside some time in your day for specifically dedicated to training, whether that be like, I'm going to get you some tools that you can use to study on your training. I'll ask I'll get some more budget, use some of our budget from, our department to get this training tool to get you to this level. And then employee has to commit to like, I will show up to these one-on-ones. I will be present to these one-on-ones. I will complete these trainings. And if both of those things can kind of come together and both parties can be as invested, then PIPs can work. PIPs can work great. But without those things, they'll fail.
And it comes in a little catch-22 situation, because if you encounter a manager who just wants to get rid of the person, then they're absolutely not going to put any of that time or effort into helping to develop that person, because they don't want that to happen, right? And so you see that happening a lot. And sometimes that even happens without them just being like, "Oh, I don't like them, let's get rid of them."
Yeah.
Sometimes it's like the relationship breaks down, right? So the relationship between the manager and the employee has broken down over time. And when they eventually get to the point of a PIP, one or both sides are just unwilling to give that other person grace, or to start from scratch, or to work together in order to make it successful. And sometimes that can be tricky, because then that kind of leads me to my next question, Alyssa, is like, is there any scenario kind of really in Canada where you get to that point and you're just like, okay, well, if this isn't going to work, we'll look at letting you go now, right? And again, at that point you don't really have that cause, right, fully documented. And so it's kind of a two-part question. One, are there things that are so egregious that you can, fire someone with cause, like basically immediately? And two, what do you do if you're like, okay, we've gotten to the point where we're putting you on a PIP. First, are you able to communicate with that person like, this is literally your last chance? And if you can, and they say, well, I don't want to, like, what's your recourse then? Like, what do you do then?
Yeah. So there's definitely things that are like so egregious that you can kind of terminate people immediately. And that'll depend on the industry, but it's usually like standard stuff like theft and, really egregious acts towards the company, whether that be like, data theft, some like a whole bunch of scenarios. I don't want to get into all the legalities of it, but like there definitely is like egregious acts that an employee could commit against the company where they're like, yeah, we have cause to like terminate you immediately with cause. For your scenario, this is where it kind of gets like a little like fuzzy, right? Where it's like I don't necessarily have all the proof. And that's where most companies will opt to fire without cause. And you can fire somebody without cause and then backfill. You can you can do that. You can't like it's tricky because you can say like we fired you without cause because it just wasn't a good fit and like here's your severance package, and then there's loopholes to tweak job descriptions, and there's ways that you can get around it where you can back up, like people do it all the time, like because
Sure.
it's easier to fire somebody without cause rather than
Yeah.
to go down the rabbit hole of having to prove cause, which is why a lot of companies do it that way, where they're just like, it's not a good fit for XYZ reason. So we're going to part ways amicably. And, here's your severance package and away you go. Now, the amount of that severance package varies. Some people are more generous. Some companies are more generous than others, which I'm sure you guys have probably known in your histories that some companies are more generous than others. And some follow common law to the letter. Some do not. Some like to just go by ESA standards. But that's usually like the easiest way to do it is just to let them go without cause. And like I said, you can backfill that position because realistically, companies can fire you for really whatever reason they want. It's just, are they going to pay you fairly?
Right. Yeah, because I think like ultimately every single one of those decisions that a company makes comes down to, you're assessing the risk that someone's going to challenge them in court, right?
Yeah.
That's ultimately it. And so like you could let someone go without cause, right, to Liz's point. You can let someone go without cause, even though it's because, I don't know, maybe they're just an asshole. If you can put in a good enough severance package that they agree and they sign things like, et cetera. There's various clauses and stuff you sign in those situations that says that you agree and you're not going to take them to court and you're not going to disparage them, et cetera, et cetera. Then of course, yeah, you can backfill it because you've taken care of it, right? That is the loophole. The loophole is essentially ensure that other person isn't going to sue you. And then you can pretty much do what you want. Normally that's solved with severance packages. Like that.
Usually, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So like in the strictest sense of the law, if you let someone go without cause and they're pissed about it and you try to backfill, they can sue you.
Yeah.
If you agree to part ways with maybe a nice severance package, sure, you do what you want.
You can do what you want. Yeah, as soon as you have that release signed, you're good. Like as long as that, if you get that signed release from the employee and they get their severance package and they're happy, then then you're kind of good to go. And like I know I'm not an employment lawyer by any means, but like I know just through my experience on both sides, the different loopholes and caveats that lawyers can come up with that can justify pretty much anything, and then it's just down to which party has the stronger case.
This is something that we mentioned on the other one. It was kind of like letting people know who aren't familiar with it that the law is not black and white.
No.
So, in as much as we would like to think that it's black or white, you can do this, you can't do that. It's not. It's very much a wibbly wobbly situation. And so, like the gray areas within it are multitude and also constantly changing because as precedent comes into play all the time, it's always changing like what you can do. And so, within employment law, there's generally always a way to achieve what it is that you want to achieve. And if you are a company that has good intentions, that's great. If you are people who have bad intentions, that's not so great, right? And so that difference between, like Alyssa mentioned, the difference between the ESA requirements and common law requirements as it comes to severance. Alyssa, what is that?
Yeah. So the ESA sets out like a standard of you can't go below this. You have to offer at least this. And it's, there's depending on how long somebody's with a company, it's like usually like a week per year of service ish. Yeah, it's like 2 weeks if you're under, or like a year over, and then so on and so forth up to like a max of I think like 12 weeks or something like that. And then there's mandatory severance that comes into play if you've been with a company longer than 5 years. Now that's just legally companies have to give you that. You cannot get around it. You have to give that, unless the only time pay in lieu of notice wouldn't come into play is if they gave you working notice. So I could say, hey Jen, we're letting you go. We're giving you 2 weeks working notice. She's been with the company for 2 years, so she wouldn't get pay in lieu of notice, and then she wouldn't get mandatory severance on top of that. But if I want her to sign a release, I would give her I would give her the incentive, which is where common law comes into play. And common law has a variety of factors that affect how much severance you would offer a person. And those are things like age, seniority level. Like you basically look at like, what is the ease of this person getting gainful employment and how long reasonably should that take? And normally like what's reasonable out there is in and around 1 month per year of service. Now that, again, like I said, fluctuates depending on how long that they've been with the company, what their seniority level is, their age, their job, the industry, the current job climate, all these things come into play. So that kind of goes up and down. Sometimes, it's like 2 weeks per year of service, up to 3 weeks, 4 weeks, and more. And then there's also things that you got to take into account, like if this person's a salesperson, commission, or if they had their bonus made up a large chunk of their compensation. Do you factor that in? So that's common law, and common law is usually something that most companies will add as like they'll add that as like the incentive part to get you to sign a release. So they'll give you the ESA piece because they know they can't get around that, and then the common law piece is what they would offer to get that signed release. And usually, like I said, it should be in and around 1 month per year of service is what is considered very reasonable. And most folks that I know would usually sign if they get that. Now, a lot of companies don't offer that. They'd like to go less because if they can pay less, they will pay less, which isn't great. But, people like they got to keep that bottom line looking great. So they try to cut wherever they can. And usually that if they think that somebody's going to sign for like 2 weeks per year of service, they'll offer that first and see if somebody fights it. And a lot of people don't fight it. And that's why companies get away with it. It's because people don't fight it. They don't know that they could potentially get more. They don't know that they're usually entitled to more. So they just kind of, or they don't have the energy to fight it. Like I know some people that are like, well, it's close enough. So I'm going to take it. I'm just going to take it as opposed to, going through the added anxiety and pressure and stress of fighting it.
Yeah, because to be clear, like the employment law, common law in Canada isn't punitive, right? It's based on compensation. So, like, how much should you be compensated based on, as Alyssa said, years of seniority, age, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, if you did sue them and eventually got to court, they would take all that into account, and you would also have to have been, obviously you'd be looking for work that whole time, and they would take into account like all that environment to see if you were entitled to anything else or should be entitled to anything else. But a lot of the time, companies can get around that by basically being very difficult. And a lot of the time, even though you might be entitled to more stuff, and if you went through court, you would get it, the time and the money you would have to spend on the legal fees getting tied up by that company being very difficult would have been swallowed up in it. And so like it's a real tricky time, whereas like most companies, and obviously we're in Canada, so most companies are fairly decent, will go for your ESA plus your 1 month per year service. You'll have companies that will do less because they have bad intentions, and then you'll have companies who might offer more because they just really want to look after their employees and really make sure that everybody is and really get that release, right? So you see all sorts.
Because I know that the release, especially for companies that have a lot of like sensitive data and stuff like that, release is really important to get. Like you really want to have that because there's really like I don't know for certain an employment lawyer could say for sure, but there's not necessarily a set statute of limitations on when an employee could come back and fight for more money. So if they see that a company acquires another company and they're like, oh well, they're doing well. I remember they kind of screwed me over. Maybe I'm going to go try and get more money now because I've had a hard time getting a job. So I'm going to go back and try and fight them for more money. Yeah. So the release is like a really important piece of paper that you want to get. So it's in a company's best interest to try to be fair as possible, so that you get that release and then you don't have to go through that down the line.
Yeah. But really, I think what I'm taking from like all of this is that we understand severance packages. Is that using a PIP to fire someone for a cause is an absolute waste of time. So you either should be using the PIP because you genuinely want that employee to succeed. But if you want to fire them, just fire them without cause and make sure they get the package.
Save yourself the time and the stress. Because what people don't realize is like you could fire somebody without cause. Let's say this person's been there for like a year. So you're looking at a very small severance package. 5 weeks.
Yeah.
Take that amount of money and calculate how much money you would have spent in your manager's time, potentially new tools, paying this employee's salary for longer than necessary. You're just getting to the same end result. Like a lot of the times you might actually be saving yourself money to just fire them then and give them a severance package and let them find something that's better fitting their skills. And you can then go forth and recruit somebody that's better fitting for the skills that you need for this role and save everybody a whole bunch of stress and a whole bunch of wasted time.
Yeah. And to be clear, as we talk about everything in this, we always talk about like the assumption that a company is doing this with good intentions. Like we acknowledge that there are a lot of people out there using these tools for bad reasons, and that a lot of people get targeted unfairly, and that is all true. But this is if you actually genuinely have a good reason to let an employee go, your best bet is to do it without cause with a good severance package, not to try and go through the motions of like PIP. And actually, if you're an employee, like we talked about this before in terms of negotiating the terms of a PIP, but I've never really consider the fact that as an employee, if you are looking down the barrel of a PIP and you're like, well, they're just trying to get rid of me, it might be in your best interest because they're going to get rid of you anyway, to go to them and be like, look, how about we save us all the pain and we sit down and we negotiate an exit. So if you want me to leave, like it looks like you want me to leave, so let's sit down and negotiate what that might look like, and let's just make this easier on everybody. Because then you could make the case Alyssa just made, which is like, look, this PIP is going to be 3 months, it's going to be blah 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 blah. pay me 6 weeks and
Mhm.
I'll be gone tomorrow.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And you can save yourself that you can spend your time and energy into finding a better fit for this
Yeah,
particular role.
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. But a
So
lot of the times people like threaten a PIP hoping that the employee will quit and they don't have to pay them anything.
yeah,
Don't do that.
Don't
no,
do that.
don't
As an
quit.
employee,
Don't
well,
quit.
don't do
Don't
that as
rage
an
quit.
employer. Don't be an
Yeah.
asshole. But don't do
Yeah.
that as don't accept it as an employee either. Like
Mhm.
don't make
Yeah.
it easy on them if they're doing it in bad ways.
Mhm.
Yeah. Don't rage quit.
Mhm. No, it
Help
doesn't
any,
serve
it will
anybody
doesn't
any
help
good.
anybody.
Yeah.
I mean, it helps
Yeah.
So
the company, but you don't want to do that. So don't do that.
Yeah. If it helps, write down what you think your severance number should look like if they were being reasonable and stick on a post-it note to your screen to help you on a daily basis not rage quit.
Yeah. And you can even title it, Don't Rage Quit. Here's why.
I'd love to rage quit though, wouldn't you? You just love
Yeah.
it. I know it doesn't. It's cutting off your nose to spite your face type thing, but like still,
Yeah.
it would be so great.
Yeah. Oh, it's so satisfying. But this is on a
For an
completely
hour.
kind of off topic again. But like when people come to me asking for advice, just generally at work, I always advise them to have a. I hope that you can blank this out if we're not allowed to swear on YouTube, Lizzie. But fuck you money fund.
Mhm.
So like have your fuck you fund if you
Yeah.
can. Obviously, this is
Yeah.
very situational, kind of dependent. Which is basically the money that you will hopefully build up over time. That if you ever are in a situation that it is just so toxic, it's so whatever that you are able to be like, you know what, I have a fuck you money fund. Fuck you guys, I'm leaving, and out you go because you have like that. I mean, it's an emergency fund, but it's more fun to think of it
Yeah.
as your fuck you money.
Yeah, I'd love to have had a big chunk of that in the past, but
Yeah.
now I
Yeah.
know I'll save for that.
Yeah, no, it's
Um,
very difficult to do in the current economic
In this
climate,
current-
but
yeah.
that satisfaction sometimes to be able to make a
Worth
point,
it.
especially if it's publicly with the company, if you're taking a stand against something.
Yeah.
I mean, if you think of a lot of companies in the US now that might want to take a stand about the rollback of like DEI, etc. If you
Hybrid
see that
work
there's
and everything.
no way for you to continue in a way that you can contribute, like you might want to be like, no, I protest and I quit a protest. And so for those situations, if you're able to do it, it's a good idea to have it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you
Yeah.
were to, so I always think of things from the employee perspective, not really the employer perspective, because I'm not in HR or in the executive leadership thing. But if an employee has been told we're going to put you on a PIP, is there any kind of like advice you would say for them, to approach that with that they might not know they can do because obviously I didn't know you could challenge it. You should have measurable results, things like that. Just kind of advice for an employee who might be facing that, coming up.
Yeah. I would say don't react right away because obviously nobody wants to be told they're being put on a PIP. So your emotions will come into play first. So just receive the information, take time to digest it, like take the night to read it over and like really read it over before you just quick, gut react to it. Because your most people's immediate instinct would be like to fight or defend. Just like receive the information, look it over, and really think like, is this fair? And then look at what they're asking of you. Is it within what you think the expectations of this role are? If the answer is no, then I would ask for, a face-to-face conversation, whether, if you're remote over Gmeet or in person and to like really be like, first, before we get to like the PIP, I really would like a better understanding of what the expectations are for my role. And then you can bring the PIP and be like, okay, where am I missing the mark? And if it's not clear in the PIP, ask for it to be clear. Like, these are the expectations for the role. This is where I'm not being, where I'm not kind of meeting those expectations. And then also it's okay to ask for help, like ask for what you need from your manager. Because like I said, a manager needs to be heavily involved in the PIP to be able for you to be successful. Like, they can't just expect you to go off on your own and find the training and just magically develop the skills all by yourself. So ask for the support you need and don't be afraid to ask for the support that you need, whether it's tooling, whether it's more FaceTime with your manager, maybe it's partnering with a more senior member of your team to, learn and train from them. Like, don't be afraid to ask for the support that you need so that you can be successful. And also ask yourself if you even want to go down this road. Because as Jen mentioned, there's other avenues too. Like, you don't have to accept the PIP if you don't think you're going to be successful, don't want to be successful. Like, maybe you're not happy in this role and you don't want to. And then there's other strategies that you can bring into play, whether, like Jen said, like negotiating an exit, and then kind of going from there and saving yourself the stress. If it's not, if you really want to stay at the company, like, don't be afraid to ask for the support that you need in order to be successful.
Yeah, that's right. And you should also probably document every single thing. Yeah.
Yes.
All of the things. Have a folder for all of the stuff that you can just throw in there for a rainy day for when you need it. Like, document, save copies of everything. You should have a copy of your employment contract. You should have a copy of your onboarding plan. You should have a copy of the PIP. You should have a copy of any performance related communication between you and your manager documented, whether that's minutes from a meeting, whether that's copies of your performance reviews. You should have separate copies of all of those things saved in a safe place that should have access removed for any reason. You have all of that documentation
exactly.
in a safe spot.
Especially if you think it's because your manager doesn't like you and just wants to get rid of you.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's hard to go back and kind of, get that historic stuff, especially if you're like let go or something like that. You don't have that documentation. So being aware of that in advance.
And even on the company side, like managers should be documenting everything. They should be documenting everything. Again, they should have clear folders for all of their team with their employment contracts, their onboarding stuff, their performance reviews, all of that stuff. Any performance related communication where, it should be a very clear cut. Anybody reading it could understand what's going on. And it's because then it removes the, they said,
ambiguity
conversation where it's like, just document everything and have all of the, like the backup, or as you'd say, the receipts, have your receipts.
I know Alyssa has had many a conversation with a manager who have come and said, hey, I've got this employee I want to put on a PIP, they're not performing well. And Alyssa's been like, okay, great, like show me all of your like communication about this before. And they'll be like, oh, but I don't have any.
That's a good HR person would do.
Their last performance review, they were given like exceeding expectations with very little like context. And it's like, well,
doesn't matter, get rid of them.
How can you get from A to B if you're just kind of blanketing everyone, being like, yeah, they're meeting expectations or whatnot, and everybody gets their bonus? Like the thing that would frustrate me the most is like I would get somebody that wants to put their team member on a PIP, and I would like pull up their performance reviews or like what their last bonus was, and they would have gotten like 100% or more of their bonus, and I'm like,
doesn't make sense.
So are they performing or not performing?
And I'm like, are they performing or not performing? Because now we don't have a case to prove that they have consistently been not performing, because 3 months ago you gave them 100% of their bonus. So how can I say like they just take a straight nosedive after they got that? Because that doesn't seem likely.
It just became terrible at their job.
Yeah.
And that basically is an indicator of just like a really bad manager, which actually is a great topic of conversation for another time, which is like all of the like the red, like, I mean, we talk about red flags a lot, but the indications in a manager to say that they're not actually managing their people effectively. Because like if manager comes to you, like, I want to put this point in PIP, you go back and be like, okay, they've got no documentation about their performance at all, don't give them any communication, all of their previous performance reviews and bonuses make it seem like they're doing a great job, then the manager is bad. Like, to be clear, we're not going to mince words. So they are either just like so conflict avoidant that they're just giving them 100% A pluses on all of their like officially documented stuff and their bonuses, etc. And then have just hoped that they could get rid of the person when they weren't doing, or they're just lazy. Right? They're lazy. They're not putting the time into managing their people effectively. They haven't taken the time to train, their people effectively, and then are like shock Pikachu face when someone's not thriving in that environment.
Pokemon reference.
It's a meme. Sometimes I have to say memes to Leslie.
Memes. I get memes. Mayonnaise.
I'm updating on the memes.
I feel like there's so many things we could talk about, and I know. I feel like we're gonna have to do a second episode with Alyssa.
Because I mean, like this manager stuff too. It's like, is the executive team and the department heads giving the managers enough time in their day to be managers?
Exactly.
Or are they just expecting them to manage staff while also doing the same job as their staff? Because that is a big problem I see too, especially in like the tech industry and stuff, where like you have these like really highly skilled engineers that you throw into a management position. They don't have any managerial experience, and they're also still expected to do all of these engineering tasks, and they have no time to actually manage their stuff.
Yes.
Or they don't have any training to manage their stuff.
Yeah. To be clear, amazing ICs does not necessarily mean they're going to be good managers. And some people are better managers than they are doers. And you have to allow them to do that, even if they're not the best technical person. This is a whole other video that we have run the gamut on like so many times in our previous working history. Is like, allow tech people to just be tech people, and allow people who are maybe not great at tech but have the basics be managers, because sometimes that actually is how it works
better
really well.
100%.
It's hard to find people with both.
Almost impossible is my experience. Almost impossible.
But a lot of times the people that get promoted into managerial positions are like the high performing.
Not great people skills.
Like as a company, you're shooting yourself in the foot, because like keep them as an IC so that they can do the thing that they're best at.
They do really well.
What they do really well, and then leave the managers that are really good at managing people, because you still have this IC person. So if you have like a hard technical problem that your team can't fix, as a manager who's maybe not the most technical, you can still pull in that IC.
And by IC you mean individual contributor.
Yes.
Yes,
Yeah.
okay,
You
yeah.
still pull in this, really high performing independent contributor
Hmm.
to help fix this problem, but not give them the burden of having to manage a whole bunch of staff.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
We will thank Alyssa for joining us today, and it's very clear that she's probably going to come back and do another one.
Yeah. Multiple.
Multiple ones.
Yeah.
So that's great.
That's great.
Thanks.
All right. Thanks, Alyssa.
Um,
Thanks for having me.